The silence was the deepest comfort I'd felt in years. It wasn't the silence of sleep, but the deliberate, clean void left after executing a perfect plan. I sat in the back of the taxi, watching the Brooklyn Heights brownstones glide past, the exhaustion from childbirth and recovery finally giving way to a strange, brittle energy. Noah was tucked securely against my chest, his small, even breaths a promise of our future. My stitches were protesting the movement, a dull, insistent ache, but the truth I held was far stronger than the pain. Lucas had lied. 3 hours earlier, I had stood over the kitchen table. I had finished packing the last diaper bag, not with toys, but with the essentials. The essentials were always the proof. I picked up the baby's receiving blanket, the soft blue fleece Noah slept with every night. I held it to my face. It didn't smell like milk or detergent. It smelled faintly, but chemically, like passion fruit and smoke. Lucas's Mistress Chloe's signature perfume. He hadn't just held Noah after seeing her, he had wrapped his sin around our son. It was the final, unforgivable offense. The truth I had uncovered over the last year had always been digital and cold. Receipts, transfers, spreadsheets. This was physical, intimate, and deeply sickening. I went to the front door. The last thing I did was swap the locks. I didn't just change the deadbolt, I replaced the entire assembly with a keyless model, securing the front and back entrances. His key was now useless. I opened my laptop one last time. I had left 2 items on the kitchen table for him. The first was the hospital bracelet, the proof that I was the one who went through the agonizing labor he slept through. The second was the spreadsheet. I had spent a year building it, documenting every single wire transfer, every business lunch he used to fund his mistress, Chloe's company, Pierce Creative. I didn't want him to simply find the truth. I wanted him to be forced to catalog his own ruin. And as I entered the final auto payment, $450 to Pierce Creative, the final line of code executed. The temporary restraining order, signed by Judge Howell at 3 a.m., was legally served. He was officially banished. My body was weak, but my resolve was absolute. I hadn't left him in a storm of screaming. I had left him in a vacuum of total control. The bank card was snapped in 2 on his desk. My key to his life worked one last time to lock him out. The $1,500 wire transfer for a Brooklyn Heights moving service was a beautiful piece of misdirection. I paid a legitimate, high-end moving company to come and move a single, empty box across the bridge to an empty shell apartment I rented for the night. The actual essentials, Noah, my laptop, and the evidence were right here with me, hidden in plain sight, heading to a different secure location. Lucas would track the money, find the wrong address, and waste hours in the panic I designed for him. The panic I knew Lucas would feel was not satisfying enough. Panic is temporary. The chilling realization of total control, that was the goal. I didn't need Lucas's passwords. I needed access to his firm's internal servers. That's where the real money, the money he was skimming from client accounts and routing to Chloe, was logged. I called Maya, my best friend, 6 months ago. She is a genius in digital security, not a spy. I showed her the first few suspicious transfers and the perfume receipt. That was enough. Maya didn't spy on Lucas. She used her professional expertise to set up a mirrored account, logging all of his firm's external wire transfers. The moment he funneled cash into Pierce Creative's accounts, I had a notification. It turned my heartbreak into a corporate investigation. I didn't need to cry. I needed to download evidence. The prenuptial agreement he was so confident about was my greatest weapon. I knew the standard infidelity clause was useless, so I focused on the one thing Lucas truly revered, his wealth. The moral turpitude clause concerning fiduciary negligence was an old loophole designed by his eccentric uncle. When I started compiling my evidence, I realized the full scope. Lucas wasn't just cheating, he was using client funds. He was committing fraud. Invoking this clause meant the divorce wasn't about dividing assets, it was about seizing all assets until he proved his innocence against a crime I had flawlessly documented. He wouldn't be fighting for alimony, he would be fighting against prison. The $450 auto payment to Pierce Creative wasn't meant to point him to a storage unit full of my documents. It was designed to expose Chloe's weakness. I knew that $450 was the specific, unusual amount Chloe was paying monthly to her uncle's overseas holding company to secretly pay back a massive bridge loan she took years ago. By wiring that money through my bank and labeling it a lease, I created an easily traceable, legally dubious connection between Lucas's funds and an offshore account tied to Chloe's family debt. The IRS didn't freeze her accounts because she was linked to Lucas. They froze her accounts because the sudden flow of money from his firm looked like a co-conspirator trying to make a debt payment under pressure. She wasn't an innocent mistress anymore. She was a financially entangled partner in his ruin. I checked my phone. The news notification confirmed it. Pierce Creative's assets were frozen. Excellent. I didn't go to Brooklyn. I went to the Upper West Side, checking into a secure apartment financed by the hospital's social services wing. I had checked the fine print on my discharge papers after Noah's birth. The hospital had a safe house program for new mothers deemed at risk. When Lucas and I argued violently about the hotel receipt a week ago, the one where he grabbed my wrist, pulling my stitches, I didn't call the police. That would have been messy and slow. I called the hospital. I calmly detailed the events to the social worker and the charge nurse, emphasizing my physical vulnerability and Noah's safety. I didn't need to lie. I just needed to tell the truth with legal precision. They immediately processed the claim, setting up this safe house transfer and guaranteeing me protection under patient privacy laws and child protective services. Lucas couldn't find me here. He couldn't even call the police on me without confirming his own abuse claim. I had turned my weakness, my postpartum recovery, into my greatest legal armor. The final piece of financial leverage I needed came from Lucas's former partner, Richard. Richard didn't just quit the firm. He had been systematically documenting Lucas's shady deals for months after a disagreement over a lucrative client. I met Richard in a neutral tech incubator 6 months ago. Maya provided the meeting space. Richard didn't want to expose Lucas publicly. He wanted to profit from the evidence. I agreed to buy his entire data cache, the secure encrypted flash drive, for a 6-figure sum. That purchase was labeled prepaid legal retainer on my spreadsheet. The retainer wasn't for my lawyer, it was the cost of purchasing the evidence that would bankrupt Lucas and fund my entire legal battle. Lucas would eventually dig into my family history and find my father's prison sentence for embezzlement. He would see it as proof that my indignation was merely a cover for my own criminal tendencies. Let him think that. The $20,000 transfer I made wasn't to pay off my father's debt for his release. It was payment to my father's old colleague, an expert in high-stakes financial crime. The money secured a final devastating file, a comprehensive list of every undocumented asset Lucas had ever acquired and hidden, a list that only a man who had been through the system could provide. My father, in his final months, gave me the tool to expose Lucas completely. I wasn't clearing my family name. I was using my family's dark expertise to ensure my son's financial security. The day of the custody hearing arrived. I wore a simple black dress, tailored but professional. I looked like a grieving mother, not a ruthless financial architect. I watched Lucas across the courtroom. He was frantic, his confidence dissolved. He still thought this was about punishing him for the affair. It was business. My lawyer, Miss Thorne, a woman I had retained with a down payment from my father's friend's account, opened with the financial evidence. She was clinical, showing the transfers, the frozen accounts, and the invocation of the moral turpitude clause. Then she presented the contract. It was my final, irrefutable act of control. It wasn't a prenup, it was a 7-figure, 2-book contract with a major publisher. The title? The Silent Exchange. How one woman used her husband's greed to reclaim her life. The advance alone was $250,000, paid into a separate trust account established by Miss Thorne. Lucas's affair, his deceit, and his eventual financial ruin were not a tragedy. They were the most valuable intellectual property I had ever created. The court was stunned. The judge, though clearly dismayed by the commercialization, could not overlook the documented fraud. Lucas had jeopardized my life, my son's financial future, and my emotional stability. I had merely leveraged the resulting story for profit. The judge granted me temporary sole custody and ordered a full forensic accounting of Lucas's remaining assets. The hearing recessed. Lucas looked shattered. He started to approach me, but Miss Thorne blocked him. I gently steered Noah's stroller toward the exit, Maya walking beside me. I stopped just out of earshot of the security guards. I let Lucas approach, watching the raw, pathetic pain in his eyes. "You really used this? All of this for a book deal?" he whispered, horrified. I leaned in close, ensuring only he could hear the true, final depth of the scheme. The book deal was the icing, Lucas. The protection was the cake. You see Chloe's family's loan? The one she was paying off $450 at a time? Her uncle, the man who loaned her that money, isn't just a businessman. He's a major financier for your brokerage firm, I continued, my voice low and firm. He knows every single illegal transaction you've ever made. I didn't pay him to keep quiet about Chloe. I paid him to expose you. I gave him a genuine, weary smile. I used the advance money from my book, The Story of How You Ruined Our Lives, to pay your firm's largest, most dangerous investor to pull his money, trigger an audit, and ensure that the financial crime charges they bring aren't just for embezzlement, but for securities fraud. I'm not fighting you for alimony, Lucas. I've funded your future prosecution. He didn't just look defeated now, he looked hollowed out. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to rage, but no sound came out. He finally understood that he hadn't just lost a wife and a son, he had lost his freedom, his reputation, and his entire financial identity to a scheme that used his own arrogance as the primary fuel. He was a chess player who never realized I was playing poker with loaded dice, betting everything on the certainty of his next selfish move. I adjusted the blanket over Noah, who stirred slightly but remained asleep, a beautiful, innocent anchor in the storm I had manufactured. You gave me the perfect crime, Lucas. You gave me the motive, the victim status, and the financial paper trail. All I had to do was follow it to the bank. Leaving wasn't losing. Leaving was choosing control, justice, and profit. I pushed the stroller toward the elevator, Maya stepping in beside me. The doors began to close, but I held my hand up, pausing the mechanism just long enough for one last cold observation. "Lucas," I said, my voice carrying just enough to slice through the cavernous marble hall. "You asked why I left the hospital bracelet. It wasn't just proof of my pain. I lifted my wrist, showing him the smooth, bare skin where the bracelet had been. I left it because that bracelet was linked to the safe house system. The hospital social workers are required to conduct check-ins for the next 6 months. His eyes widened in a silent scream of comprehension. "They'll be watching your address, Lucas," I finished, the corner of my mouth twitching into a tiny final smile. "Every time you try to move money, every time you try to leave the state, they'll get a notification. You're not just under a court order, you're still my patient under 24/7 domestic risk monitoring." The doors slid shut, separating us forever. The silence that fell on Lucas was absolute, vast, and terrifying. The elevator car began its silent descent, carrying Maya, Noah, and me toward the street, toward freedom. Maya let out a slow, deliberate breath, the tension of the last year finally escaping her lungs. "You really did it, Avery," she murmured, her voice laced with awe. "You used his own security parameters against him. He's cornered." "He thought the system was broken, Maya," I replied, smoothing the blanket over Noah. He thought money and arrogance bought him impunity. I just showed him that the system works perfectly, provided you know exactly where the pressure points are. My gaze drifted to Noah. He was the reason, the core motive that surpassed revenge and even surpassed the profit. I needed to ensure that no matter how hard Lucas fought, his criminal taint could never touch our son's life, his education, or his financial future. The hospital monitoring wasn't just punishment, it was a permanent legal restraining measure that forced the state to keep an eye on Lucas's behavior for my protection. Every aggressive move he made now would be logged not by me, but by a third-party social worker reporting directly to the court. He couldn't afford a single misstep. The elevator chimed softly, announcing the lobby. The world outside the courtroom was bright, busy, and oblivious to the professional and personal slaughter that had just occurred upstairs. We exited the building, the cool evening air a crisp contrast to the stuffy courtroom. I saw the waiting black car, provided by my publisher's security team, pull up to the curb. I paused, feeling the weight of the moment, the final, irreversible separation. Lucas had been right about one thing. He hadn't seen me coming. He never looked past the quiet wife, the new mother, the emotionally devastated victim. He never saw the daughter of a man who understood the architecture of financial fraud, or the woman who possessed the patience to wait 12 months for the perfect, profitable moment of collapse. I settled into the car, Noah secured beside me. I looked out the window at the city. A million windows, a million secrets. The money from the book advance had already cleared the initial deposit into Noah's newly established untouchable trust fund. The silent exchange was complete. My phone vibrated. A text from Miss Thorne. The foreclosure proceedings on the apartment start tomorrow. They're citing the moral turpitude clause. I turned off my phone, leaned back into the leather seat, and closed my eyes. The faint but sickening smell of Chloe's perfume finally fading from my memory, replaced by the clean, exhilarating scent of new beginnings and guaranteed profit.